Hello folks, welcome to the first day of our summer online course called Films About Painting. I'm Nathan Peck and I'm going to be conducting an experiment here. This course is a special topics course, which means that it's the first time that it's been offered. I have taught for the last 10 years at St. Xavier, and I mostly teach multimedia, computer graphics, web design. But when I'm not teaching, I'm often spending a lot of time in the studio. The studio that I have set up is a place where I can make paintings and where I can make videos, right? In this case, I'm using one of the most low-tech methods. This is just my phone. I've got my phone trained on me while I'm telling you the story. The idea here is that you might be doing exactly the same thing to tell me stories about the paintings and about the films that we're going to be watching this semester. I am not an art historian. I'm a painter. I make pictures and I spend a lot of time in the studio trying to figure out how to do this, how to do it in a new and interesting way, but also how to do something that hasn't already been done a million times before. One of the things that I do, besides just sitting here and making pictures, is often when I'm painting, I've got my computer plugged in and I'm basically just watching some videos. I'm watching some videos about some of my favorite painters, about a picture that I might have seen when I was at the museum last time. I try to dig up a little bit of history on some of the things that really inspire me to understand why they were made. Perhaps that can help me understand why I'm making what I'm making. Over the course of the next 7 weeks, I'm going to try to create a situation where you can see and understand more about some of the paintings that are in the museums by understanding it the same way that I learned it. By looking at some prominent art historians telling some really amazing stories about some of these paintings that otherwise I would have no understanding. I would have no reason to understand why I would even bother looking at them. But once I have a little bit of backstory and I understand that this person is trying to do something that is in direct retaliation against something that the previous generation did, and you can sort of see why these folks are changing this tradition. Why isn't every painting just an amazingly realistic portrait of somebody, right? Because after a little while that gets a little bit boring. So if it's not going to be an amazing portrait of somebody, what is it going to be? Is it when you look at the beginning of the tour at the museum, which you'll be taking later on this semester with me, you'll see that a lot of the early paintings are of either biblical stories or of sort of famous, important, wealthy people, right? Now again, it's important to have those documents of our civilization. You can understand what a whole mass of people were thinking at any given time, or who they thought were important, or who happened to be powerful. But unfortunately, that's not all that's going on in the world. We need artists to continue to evolve the storytelling device, to try to tell different stories. Sometimes it's really interesting to see what the poor people of any particular civilization looks like. That requires a totally different painter to do a totally different thing. They have to sort of decide to do that because chances are that poor person isn't paying them to do that, right? We also, over time, would like to see paintings take on a lot of different forms and a lot of different shapes. Does every painting have to represent everything realistically, right? There are some things that I'd like to tell stories about that aren't, that don't even exist, right? If I want to make up a story, then I have to learn how to communicate something that's coming straight out of my imagination. Now, beyond trying to understand the relationship between the painters that came before and the painters that came after, the other really, really fun, foundationally interesting thing about painting, as far as I'm concerned, is the fact that paintings allow you to sort of tell stories, right? But they allow you to tell stories even to people that don't speak your language. People from entirely different times, entirely different generations are still able to understand the stories of another culture. Think about the cave paintings, right? Paintings from 40,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago, right? We would not be able to talk to those people, yet this is a message brought to you. This says bull, right? This says animal. Now, if you were trying to talk to that person, you might have a very difficult time communicating that idea of cow or bull or whatever without just drawing a simple image, right? Images transcend language, they transcend time. They allow you to be able to understand things, people that don't speak your language. Some of the first paintings that you see if you're walking through the last 500 years of painting were made by people in Italy. They were later made by people in Spain or in France. And only it wasn't until about the 1950s that the paintings that we're going to be looking at were made in America, where people are speaking American English, right? Which means that all of those images before certainly have been translated from artist to art historian, but at the same time, when you walk in and look at those images, you know what you're looking at, because the images speak an entirely different language. And that's a particularly important, significant thing about painting, and the reason that I think it's extraordinarily interesting to study. Now, we're not going to limit this class to the study of painting. That's going to be one subject. The other subject, of course, is going to be this act of filmmaking, right? The idea of combining moving images, spoken word, music, actors, experts, people combining these things together to try to tell a story that perhaps takes an hour to watch, but gives you an hour's worth of knowledge, right? Unfolds something slowly over time, peaks and valleys of interest over the course of that time. What I want you to try to understand is that as powerful as the painting is, and as powerful as the video is, they are entirely different, and they have entirely different agendas. They have entirely different functions, and they will be able to last in entirely different ways, right? A painting can last on a wall, in the case of the Sistine Chapel that you'll be looking at this week, can last on a wall for 500 years or on a ceiling for 500 years, and you're still able to see it, and you're still able to understand it, you're still able to follow it. We will see in another 400 years whether or not film does the same thing, without, in the case of video or film, having to copy it from media to media to media so that you can still read it, right? Very few of us still have film projectors, right? But many of the first documentary films were made using a film projector. They had to be translated to VHS, perhaps translated to DVD. Perhaps you go back to the original to remaster it for the internet, right? But this is a situation. They're very different this way. One can last for a long time. One decays. You'll also see this week in the documentary about Leonardo da Vinci that some paintings don't last for 500 years. The Last Supper, another famous painting by this master, is decaying. It's peeling off the wall. It is eroding to the point that there's only about 20% of that painting left. Consider that when you're considering, these two mediums. We're going to be looking at both painting and film this semester. But there's going to be a third thing that we're going to be looking at, and that is the blog. You are going to be creating a blog that is going to be communicating with the rest of the class over the course of this semester. You can choose whether or not this blog is going to take a written form or if it's going to take a video form like mine. It's totally up to you, but I would like you to just begin the process of thinking about that delivery and thinking about how to do it in an original and interesting way. I want you to start to develop a little bit of a style of delivery, a little bit of a style of bringing us the information, kind of like a news anchor, a newscast. You're trying to communicate to us, and I'd like you to look at ways to do that. Again, news still comes to us via words and images. You're never allowed to use only words. You have to at least incorporate images, even if you're going to do just a text blog. Let's take a look at something else. So let me talk just a little bit about the videos that you're going to be watching this week and why I chose those. First of all, the first video that you're going to be watching is called Paint. It's called Modern Marvels Paint. It's by the History Channel. If you've seen any of the Modern Marvels episodes, you have an idea of what you're going to be seeing. They try to take one major revolutionary idea or product and try to communicate a little bit about how it's evolved. In this particular case, paint, the story sort of starts with the pigments used by the cavemen and takes you all the way up to pigments and paint methods that are used on commercial airliners, right? It's going to look at paint as a product and not necessarily as a type of artwork, although they will discuss a little bit about the history of the evolution of pigments and how it affected certain art movements. But what you're going to be looking at more than anything else is the substance of paint. So let me tell you why I chose Leonardo and Michelangelo for this week. These are two artists that I've probably learned about since high school, maybe even middle school. They're artists that are always part of this mystical idea of the Renaissance. The more that I looked into this and the more that I've spent time doing research and especially watching films about this era, I've learned a lot about the role of these particular guys and in this idea of the Renaissance man. Somebody who knows a little bit about a lot of different things. In the case of these two gentlemen, Both of them, we're going to be looking at their paintings, but paint was by no means the only medium that they worked in. Both of them had some experience in a wide variety of other things. They're both amazing drawers. They're both particularly, Michelangelo did a lot of stone carving. Leonardo da Vinci did a lot of invention. I kind of enjoy this idea of making a whole lot of different things and learning a little bit about a lot of stuff. As I said before, I do web design and I do multimedia, I do video art, and I also like to make sculptures and paintings. This is a torn up old piano. You have to sort of figure out how it works before you figure out how to remix it into something else. It's a fun adventure. I love this idea of mixing a little bit of each. The school that I went to at the University of Iowa, the program that I went to is called Intermedia. And in that particular department, you met up once a week to talk about these intermediate projects that you were working on, but you also had to study some in the sculpture department, some in the drawing department, some in the dance, theater, video, film, so that you could bring this stuff together to create a new hybrid art form of some sort. Some of the works that I really did involved the combination of painting and video, pushing them together. I love this idea. It sort of feels, it's a very liberating approach. Rather than becoming a master of one medium, although I did my best to learn as much as I could, and Leonardo and Michelangelo were amazing painters. They studied that. But it was by no means the only thing that they were interested in. I like that concept. That's what inspired me about their story, and that's what inspired me to take on the art approach that I did take on. Now, these two particular guys are also really interesting because they were working on their masterpieces exactly 500 years ago. 500 years ago, the Sistine Chapel ceiling was underway by Michelangelo, who was in his mid-30s, and the Mona Lisa was underway by Leonardo da Vinci, who was in his early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. These two guys were at different points in their lives, but they knew who each other were. They were operating in the same city from time to time, and they were both working on their masterpieces exactly the same time, 500 years ago.